How do you arrive at the assessment based on the UN Convention definition of genocide that Israel is carrying out a genocide right now?
Well, you're right. That's based upon a UN convention, the binding international legal treaty that defines what genocide is, what its elements are. And we know that genocide is a term that is often politicized, it's often misused, it's often used as just a charge of abuse by one side or the other. But in this case, all of the elements that are listed in the UN Convention, beginning with explicit expressions of intent by senior Israeli officials in the government and in the military, in addition to the specific prohibited acts, killing on a large scale, expulsions, creating conditions that are determined to bring about effectively the destruction of a population, in this case, the population in Gaza. All of these have been very well documented and add up to the crime of genocide. Of course, it's not exclusively genocide. There are a whole range of other war crimes, crimes against humanity that are being perpetrated there. But this is the supreme crime of international law, and the response of the international community in the wake of this crime has been truly disappointing.
Craig, there is, as you note in that convention, also a mental element that is defined as, quote, intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. Israel has continued to say it is defending itself against the terror attack on October 7th that killed more than 1,400 innocent Israelis. And here is what the IDF spokesman Peter Lerner just told my colleague Phil.
We wanted to take out the enemy, that a brutal enemy that has no regard for human life, that intentionally places its infrastructure in the civilian arena. For 3 weeks now, we've been calling on the people of the northern Gaza Strip to evacuate the north. For 3 weeks now, Hamas has been telling people in the north to stay put. Unfortunately, not enough people obviously are listening, and this is the tragedy of this event. You know, each and every one of these civilian deaths caught up in this war, a war that Israel did not want.
And here is what John Kirby at the White House and Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries have both said in the last day. Listen.
We're not funding any kind of a genocide. And as I said earlier, Dana, that's not what Israel's after here. They're going after Hamas terrorists. And yes, there have been civilian casualties. And as I said, none of them should happen.
Israel is not conducting an ethnic cleansing campaign. Israel is not engaged in genocide.
Israel continues to say it is going after Hamas. It is Hamas that is keeping its civilians where it is, that is using them, innocent Palestinians, as human shields. Why label that genocide?
Of course, we've seen these. Yeah, we've seen these claims before, repeatedly by the Israeli authorities in previous large-scale attacks on civilian populations. First, claiming self-defense under international law gives no state the right to commit the kinds of atrocities that it is carrying out now. You're talking about the wholesale destruction, not just of apartment buildings and homes and whole neighborhoods, but of whole sections of the already densely populated Gaza Strip. Secondly, let me respond to the U.S. officials that you spoke to. That's particularly disturbing because the U.S. also has an obligation under international law to ensure respect for the Geneva Conventions. And in this case, it's not only not providing that support, it's actually been supporting the onslaught in Gaza. You're talking about millions of civilians.
Craig, you are saying these are Israeli claims. Are you refuting the fact that Hamas surrounds its militants with innocent Palestinian civilians? That one of the reasons that so many of them were in Jabalia at that refugee camp is because they had been told by Hamas not to flee to the south?
I am refuting that, absolutely. I lived in Gaza for the better part of 2 years in the 1990s. I can tell you it is extremely densely populated. Even at the best of times, the idea of moving millions of people, 1.1 million people, that half of the population of Gaza, southward in a situation where neighborhoods are bombed to rubble, where people are injured, where there are no roads, where there are no reliable vehicles, where when they move, they are still attacked by Israeli airstrikes, is really a very disingenuous claim. We know from our people on the ground that is not the situation on the ground. People are not staying put because they're being ordered to do so. They have nowhere to go. And remember, Gaza is an open-air prison. in which, these millions of people are locked in. They can move around within the fence, but even moving around within the fence now is a practical impossibility. So these old tropes about, the Palestinians sacrificing their own people, these don't hold up to the facts on the ground, and they contradict the requirements of international law. That was the point of my letter, Poppy, was we need to get back to a paradigm based upon international law and international human rights.
I read your letter. I want to get to a specific part of it in a moment, but you used the word pogrom at the beginning of our conversation. Do you assess the pogrom on the Jewish people on October 7th to be genocide carried out by Hamas?
Well, I think one of the things that the UN has been very clear about, and I've been very clear about, is that civilian life is precious and attacks on civilians are prohibited by the very international law.
But is that a yes or no? Because even the updated, Craig, is that a yes or no? Because even the updated Hamas charter from 2017 calls for the complete, it calls it Israel as entirely illegal, and you know that it states from the river to the sea. So my question is what Hamas did genocide?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think that what we need an investigation to determine the scope and the nature of the crimes committed by Hamas. There's no question that war crimes were committed. This is evident because of the large loss of civilian life that accompanied Hamas's attacks. But the point of my letter was that the UN has no trouble in criticizing actions by armed groups like Hamas. Where they fall down, and what was missing in this case was criticism of powerful states like Israel and, frankly, like the United States. And this is what we need. We need an approach based on the rule of law, where it's the rules that apply, not taking sides of one party or the other, but insisting on respect for the precious lives of civilians and for the principles of international law. And that's where the UN has fallen down in this case. Parts of the UN. Poppy, I want to be clear. I'm not condemning the whole UN here. UN staff on the ground have been absolutely heroic. Humanitarian workers, dozens of whom have been killed under Israeli bombs just in the last couple of weeks. Human rights monitors and others have been doing what they are mandated to do.
Craig.
But the political side of the House has not really communicated what it needs to communicate with regard to the massive assaults on civilian populations, which I have concluded constitute genocide.
Craig, I want to understand a specific part of your letter. Let me read this. You lay out 10 things that you believe that the UN should do in this conflict. Number 3, one state based on human rights. You write, quote, we must support the establishment of a single democratic secular state in all of historic Palestine. What do you say to critics who view that and read that as calling for the elimination of Israel? Are you?
Well, I'm very clearly what I'm calling for is the salvation of Israel. I'm not asking for the elimination of Israel. I'm asking for the elimination of what all international human rights organizations and Israeli human rights organizations have called an apartheid system. I'm merely asserting the essential need, if we want to resolve this conflict, of establishing a place where everyone is equal, where we have equal rights for Christians, Muslims, and Jews, and abandoning the current approach where the indigenous population are excluded from those rights. So if Israel is to be saved, it's going to be saved based upon a state where there are equal rights for everyone, Christians, Muslims, Jews, and others. That is not the elimination of Israel. That's the elimination of apartheid.
Craig Mohiber, thank you.